Open this door right now. Don't test my authority. That's what our HOA president was yelling at my wife after Melanie ignored her knocking for 3 days straight. The woman was so furious she actually called 911, accusing my wife of suspicious criminal activity just because no one answered the door. What she didn't realize was that she was picking a fight with the wrong person, and when a police officer showed up asking for ID, the next minute unfolded in a way none of us could have seen coming. My name's Michael. I'm just an ordinary guy who edits videos for YouTube weddings, travel vlogs, the kind of work that has me glued to 3 monitors for most of the day. Melanie and I had recently moved to a suburb called Greenfield, thinking we'd found our perfect version of the American dream. Turns out, the dream came with a nightmare named Tina Foster, the HOA president. Melanie has been my anchor for 8 years, calm, confident, the kind of person who never loses her cool. I thought she worked in consulting, that's what she'd always told me. I didn't realize she was keeping the biggest secret of our marriage, one that would completely change how I saw her, and leave Tina reeling. It all started on move-in day. We were carrying boxes into the house under a blazing summer sun when a woman appeared out of nowhere. She was dressed like she was on her way to a corporate meeting, a full suit, blazer, slacks despite the sweltering heat. In her hands was a thick binder that could probably stop a bullet, and a measuring tape dangled from her belt like she was a one-woman building inspector. "Welcome to Greenfield," she declared, marching up to our door. "I'm Tina Foster, your HOA president. I need to conduct a mandatory compliance inspection." Melanie, balancing the couch with me, gave a polite smile. "Not today, we're still unpacking." The look Tina gave her was priceless, as if Melanie had just told her the earth was flat. "Excuse me? HOA regulations require immediate access for new resident compliance verification." She started flipping through her binder, clearly hunting for the rule she thought would force us to let her in. Melanie didn't flinch. "We'll schedule something once we're settled." Then she gently closed the door, not slammed, not rude, just a calm, deliberate shut. I thought that was the end of it. Wrong. For the next 10 minutes, Tina stood on our porch ringing the doorbell non-stop, like a deranged woodpecker. Melanie ignored her, focusing on work calls while I debated stepping in, but something about my wife's composure made me hold back. Eventually, Tina stormed off to her golf cart, complete with an whole Lagoa, and Melanie simply said, "Some people need to learn boundaries." That night, as we unpacked our bedroom, I couldn't help but ask, "How are you so calm about that?" She smiled knowingly. "I deal with difficult people all the time. The trick is to never let them think they have control." I assumed she meant demanding clients or office drama. I had no clue she was talking about actual criminals. The next morning, a note appeared on our door in jagged, furious handwriting. "Final notice. Mandatory inspection required within 24 hours or face escalating penalties." Melanie read it, crumpled it up, and tossed it in the trash. "She can't actually force her way in, right?" I asked. Melanie paused, coffee halfway to her lips, and met my eyes. "Michaela broken bar, there's something about my job I haven't told you." That was my first real clue. Over the next few days, Tina's behavior turned into psychological warfare. I'm a video editor, and my biggest daily stress is when a bride demands 17 different cuts of her highlight reel. But Tina operated on a completely different level of crazy. One morning, while I was editing a travel vlog, pounding erupted at the front door, hard, relentless, as if someone was trying to break it down. Through the window, I saw Tina in another full business suit, fists hammering away. "I know you're in there. Open this door immediately," she shouted. Melanie, in the kitchen on a work call about cleaning up complaint backlogs, didn't even look fazed. Melanie stayed on her call as if nothing unusual was happening, even while Tina was pounding on our front door like she was trying to break it down. I sat there, baffled, watching my wife calmly talk about work while the HOA president was practically trying to batter her way inside. After what felt like forever, Tina finally stomped back to her golf cart, but that was just her warm-up act. Around midday, she returned, this time armed with a bullhorn. Yes, an actual bullhorn, like she was coordinating a construction crew. "Emergency inspection required. Open immediately." Her voice boomed so loud it rattled the windows. Neighbors peeked out from their porches, curious about the chaos. From my office window, I could see the whole scene while Melanie, still in the kitchen, kept right on with her phone call, ignoring it all. The strangest part wasn't even Tina's stunt, it was how Melanie reacted. When she finally hung up, she strolled over to me, glanced outside, and said, "She can pound the door all day. I don't answer to harassers." The tone, the phrasing, a broken bar. It wasn't the way someone in a consulting job talks about an annoying client. It sounded like something a person with real authority says when dealing with someone who's way out of their league. Meanwhile, our teenage neighbor Lucasa, an aspiring filmmaker, was recording the whole thing from his upstairs window. I could hear him narrating into the camera. Day 3 of door pounding lady. Subject ignores all attempts at contact. Even the kid could see Melanie's composure was unusual. Later that evening, Tina escalated again. She plastered the neighborhood with official-looking final warning notices printed on fancy letterhead, complete with seals, declaring that failure to allow entry within 24 hours will trigger emergency HOA intervention. I started to worry. What if she can fine us? What if she has some legal power we don't know about? I asked over dinner. Melanie gave a small, amused smile. "She has absolutely no legal authority to enter our home," she said with a certainty that made me wonder just how much she knew about the law and about keeping people out. The next morning, Tina went even further. Flyers appeared on every mailbox accusing us of being a community safety risk, complete with our address and claims we were resisting inspection. My phone lit up with calls from concerned neighbors. I found myself considering whether letting Tina in might be the easiest way to end it. That's when Melanie quietly picked up her phone, stepped into another room, and spoke in a voice that carried weight. "It's Hayes. We may need to intervene." Hayes. I thought her name was Melanie Johnson. And the way she spoke, it wasn't to a boss or a co-worker. It sounded like she was reporting to someone, but in a way that implied she was in charge. "Who are you calling?" I asked when she came back. Her look was calculating, almost measuring how much she should reveal. "Let's just say Tina's about to get a lesson in boundaries," she said. The next morning, sirens cut through the air. I figured it might be a medical emergency or a fire, but then I saw a police car stop right in front of our house. My stomach dropped. Tina emerged from her home dressed like she was about to give a boardroom presentation, clutching a folder labeled evidence. She had apparently called 911, her voice trembling with theatrical urgency, claiming we were blocking a mandatory inspection and might be hiding illegal activity. So she called the police because we wouldn't open our door. And while any reasonable person would have dismissed her complaint as absurd, the dispatcher still had to send someone when she claimed suspicious criminal behavior. I watched as a young officer stepped out of his cruiser and approached Tina. She wasted no time, pointing toward our home as if it were a drug den, waving her evidence folder, and insisting we were hiding something. To the officer's credit, he stayed professional, jotting down notes, asking Tina for details, clearly trying to understand what exactly the emergency was. I considered stepping outside to explain that we were just normal people who didn't feel like letting an unhinged HOA president rifle through our drawers, but something told me to hold back and watch how Melanie handled it. That's when she surprised me. Calm as ever, she stepped outside in jeans and a t-shirt, her hands visible at her sides like she'd done this exact thing countless times. "Ma'am," the officer began politely, "I understand there's been some disagreement about property access." Melanie nodded. "Yes, she's been insisting on coming into my home and refuses to take no for an answer." Then she reached into her back pocket, pulled out her wallet, and handed over her ID. From my vantage point inside, I couldn't see the details, but I saw the change in the officer's posture. His demeanor flipped in an instant from casual investigator to standing at attention. "Chief Hayes," he said, voice tightening with respect. "Ma'am, I didn't realize you lived here." My jaw practically hit the floor. "Chief, my wife was a police chief, 8 years of marriage, and I'd believed her story about working in consulting." Tina's face went through a rapid slideshow of confusion, dawning realization, and then the expression of someone who just realized they'd brought a squirt gun to a missile launch. "Chief, you can't be," she stammered. The officer cut in smoothly. "Ma'am, calling 911 because someone won't answer their door is not a crime. HOA rules don't override the Fourth Amendment." I couldn't stay inside any longer. I stepped out and found myself in the middle of this bizarre table, Leah, my wife, radiating authority, the officer treating her like a commanding officer, and Tina looking like she'd seen a ghost. Broken bar, a police chief. The words stumbled out of my mouth before I could catch them. Melanie gave me a small smile. Surprise, honey, we need to talk. As the officer calmly explained the basics of constitutional law to Tina, neighbors started trickling out of their houses. I overheard whispers as someone muttering that Tina had actually called the cops because Melanie didn't answer the door, followed by laughter. Lucas, the budding filmmaker next door, was still recording, narrating in a mock nature documentary voice. Here we see the hoe Karen in her natural habitat, a broken bar, discovering her prey is actually the apex predator. The kid was a natural. Tina, meanwhile, was retreating with her evidence folder clutched to her chest. "This isn't over," she muttered, though her voice lacked any conviction. "Honestly, when you call the police on the police chief for ignoring you, your options are pretty limited." After the officer drove off and the neighbors dispersed, I followed Melanie inside with 1,000 questions swirling in my head. "How long have you been a police chief?" I asked. She sat at the kitchen table, motioned for me to sit, and said matter-of-factly, 6 months. I was promoted after the last chief got caught in a corruption scandal. And yes, I've been investigating hoe harassment cases. I just stared. "So broken bar, when you said you worked in consulting a broken bar," she grinned. "I consult with the DA's office on cases involving abuse of authority." Not Aaliyah, just a broken bar incomplete. That night, as I was still wrapping my head around the fact that I was married to someone who could legally arrest people, Tina went on a midnight posting spree online. All caps rant. "Police chief hiding among U.S. refuses hoe inspection. What is SHE hiding? Research Johnson case." The replies tore her apart. My favorite: "Tina, you called 911 because someone wouldn't open their door?" But one comment made my stomach drop. "Wait, foster family involved in Johnson case." When I showed it to Melanie, she shut the laptop immediately. "Some things are better left in the past," she said, her tone sharper than I'd ever heard it. The days that followed felt unreal. Melanie fighting crime during the day, coming home to deal with our deranged neighbor at night. I kept thinking this had to be a dream. But no, I really had been living with a police chief who was quietly dismantling hoe corruption while I worried about video deadlines and editing software updates. Over coffee the morning after the 911 fiasco, I tried to make sense of everything. "So let me get this straight," I said. "You're not just the police chief, you're actively investigating hoe corruption?" Melanie nodded, stirring her coffee with the deliberate patience of someone explaining algebra to a kindergartner. "The last chief ignored a mountain of complaints about hoe presidents abusing power at kickbacks, fabricated violations, intimidation. I've been quietly building cases against several boards." I blinked at her. "And you didn't think to mention this?" Her look was equal parts apology and you wouldn't have understood anyway. "Operational security. And, Michaela Broken Bar, you're not exactly a vault when you get excited about something." She wasn't wrong. I once spoiled a surprise party by posting about it 3 days early. "Still a forgetting to tell your spouse they're married to a police chief. That's next level omission." "So, what now?" I asked. "Now we document everything Tina does and let her hang herself with her own rope," Melanie said with calm, almost predatory confidence. It was dawning on me that my wife wasn't just enduring our Navarro, she was running a professional investigation that could end with actual charges. Meanwhile, Tina was spiraling. Lucas, ever the budding documentarian, showed me footage of her holed up in her home for nearly an entire day, surrounded by energy drinks and piles of printouts. She was deep diving every scrap of information on Melanie Hayes, dredging up an old news article about an officer-involved incident from years ago. The problem? People like Tina filter the world through their own beliefs. She ignored the parts about children being rescued and an explosion being prevented, and fixated on the word she thought painted Melanie as dangerous. It escalated into full-blown conspiracy. Madia Lucas caught her putting together a PowerPoint titled Chief Hayes, A History of Violence, complete with dramatic fonts, blurry screenshots, and red arrows drawn like a YouTube scandal video thumbnail. It was part courtroom drama, part internet rabbit hole. But the most unsettling thing wasn't her obsession, it was her organization. This wasn't chaotic rage, it was focused, strategic, and disturbingly meticulous. That's when I decided to do more than watch from the sidelines. If Melanie was building a case, I could at least do some digging myself. I started chatting with neighbors, asking about their run-ins with Tina. What I heard was jaw-dropping. Mrs. Patterson, a sweet retiree, had been fined $400 for a wind chime noise violation that didn't even exist in the HOA bylaws. The couple across the street got slapped with a $300 fine for their dog barking during the day, supposedly violating quiet hours Tina had invented. And Lucas Bleshema had unintentionally assembled the neighborhood's best evidence archive for his school project. He showed me receipts he'd fished out of Tina's trash purchases for official letterhead, emails to a print shop about HOA document design, and Amazon orders for embossing seals. She wasn't just playing power games, she was literally fabricating legal-looking documents. When I handed this evidence to Melanie, she got a look in her eyes I'd never seen before, like a predator spotting injured prey. "This crosses into federal mail fraud," she said. "She's been using the Postal Service to distribute fake legal notices." But before we could talk strategy, Melanie's phone rang. Unknown number. She glanced at the caller ID and instantly went pallid, all the color drained from her face at once. "That's impossible," she whispered. "He shouldn't have this number." The phone kept ringing. "Who is it?" I asked, unnerved by her reaction. "Someone from my past who was never supposed to find me," she said quietly, letting it go to voicemail. I didn't even have time to push for more information before another scene erupted outside. Tina was in her yard at night, standing under a spotlight with poster boards and a laser pointer, rehearsing what looked like an over-the-top political rally. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to no one in particular, "I present irrefutable evidence of police corruption." Lucas was filming again, catching every wild gesture and dramatic pause. She had charts, photographs, and highlighted documents pinned up like she was unveiling the results of a year-long investigation into alien landings. Later, as we got ready for bed, Melanie sat on the edge of the mattress and dropped something that chilled me. "Michaela Brokenbar, I think Tina's son might be connected to a case I worked years ago. If I'm right, all of this makes sense." She wouldn't elaborate, no matter how I pressed, but the tension in her voice told me it was serious. Serious enough to explain why someone might wage a doorbell war against the police chief, who was trying to contact Melanie. And why did it scare her as someone who faced down criminals for a living? The days that followed were a strange kind of Cold War, each side gathering information, quietly preparing for whatever was coming next. Melanie worked her fraud case against Tina with the precision of someone who'd sent people to prison before. While Melanie was methodically compiling her fraud case like someone who'd sent real criminals to prison, Tina was diving headfirst into her delusional crusade, convinced she was about to uncover the scandal of the century. And me? I was caught in the middle, trying to edit wedding videos while my wife conducted what looked like a federal sting operation and our neighbor rehearsed political-style speeches under the moonlight. One evening, Melanie finally opened up more about the Johnson case, and the puzzle pieces started snapping into place. 6 years earlier, back when she was still a detective, she'd responded to a tip about a meth lab on the verge of exploding. "We had maybe 5 minutes to evacuate the building," she said. "Inside were 3 teenagers caught up with the wrong crowd. She personally carried 2 of them out, one so strung out he didn't even realize the danger." The injury that Tina had dug up in her so-called research wasn't from police brutality at all. It was a chemical burn from that very meth lab sustained by the kid Melanie had saved. But then I overheard something during a phone call she had with an old colleague that made my stomach twist. "Yeah, the foster kid," her colleague said. "His mom never knew we saved his life. She only saw the arrest." Foster. Tina's last name was Foster. Suddenly, the whole picture sharpened in an ugly way. When I asked Melanie if Tina's son could be the same kid from her case, her face changed completely, like she realized she'd been solving the wrong mystery all along. "If that's true," she said slowly, "then everything she's been doing starts to make sense." From Tina's perspective, her son's arrest 6 years ago probably looked like brutality, not a rescue. She wouldn't have known about the imminent explosion or Melanie's role in preventing it. All she saw was her injured child in handcuffs. Years later, she moves into a new neighborhood, butts heads with a woman who refuses to bend to her authority, then learns that woman is a police chief and not just any chief, but the same one from her son's arrest. It must have snapped something inside her. Tina was now treating this like a mob takedown. She'd printed every article she could find on the Johnson case, highlighted anything negative about the police, and crafted a wildly skewed timeline painting Melanie as a violent cop. She ignored the rescues, the commendations, the fact that her son's life had been saved at all. Neighbors were starting to split into factions. Some believed Tina's conspiracy theories, eyeing us warily when we fetched the mail. Others had reached their breaking point and were seeing her for what she was, a bully with too much time and no oversight. Lucas, still working on his school film project, became our unofficial spy, collecting footage so good it could have won awards without him even realizing it. Melanie's evidence pile was growing fast. More than $3,000 in fake fines, forged signatures, fabricated violations, even regulations Tina had completely made up. "This isn't just harassment," Melanie said, flipping through her files. "This is mail fraud, forgery, and theft by deception. We're talking federal charges." But watching Tina's isolation set in was unsettling. She'd done it to herself, but there's something eerie about seeing someone retreat fully into their delusions. She rarely left the house except for her mailbox or to stage bizarre presentation rehearsals on her lawn. People avoided her at the grocery store. Even the mailman had adopted a drop-and-dash routine. The tipping point came when she scheduled an emergency home meeting, somehow securing the community center for her grand reveal. She mailed every household an official-looking invitation, complete with fake seals and urgent public safety warnings about Chief Hayes. Lucas filmed her setting up poster boards, lighting rigs, even catered snacks as though she were giving a TED Talk instead of pushing a neighborhood conspiracy. That evening, as we debated whether to witness the circus, Melanie's phone rang again with that same unknown number. This time, she answered. I couldn't hear the man's words, but I saw the way her expression shifted, a surprise, concern, and then a quiet relief. When she hung up, she told me, "That was Danny Harris. He changed his name after getting clean. He's Tina's son." Danny had found out about his mother's online rants and recognized Melanie's name from the Johnson case. He'd been trying to reach her, not to accuse, but to thank her for saving his life and to apologize for his mother's actions. "He's been sober for 5 years, Melanie said softly after their nearly hour-long conversation. When Melanie hung up the call, her voice was calm but her eyes gave away the weight of what she'd just learned. "Danny's been clean for years. He's got a stable job, a family, a broken bar, and his mom has no idea the woman she's been targeting is the one who saved his life." The night of Tina's emergency meeting, the community center was bursting with people like it was the championship round of some neighborhood drama league. I'd never seen a turnout like it. Half the town seemed to have shown up for a front-row view of the police chief versus HOA president showdown. Melanie and I walked in together. She carried a single manila folder I hauled in a box stuffed with evidence. Tina had arrived well before everyone else, transforming the place into a bizarre blend of courtroom and TED Talk. Giant poster boards leaned against the walls, a borrowed projector was set up, and each attendee had a professionally bound packet waiting on their chair. She was decked out in a retro power suit with shoulder pads wide enough to catch satellite signals, hair pulled so tight it looked painful, and radiating the kind of manic confidence that made people instinctively keep their distance. When she called the room to order, she sounded like she was presiding over a Supreme Court hearing. Her opening statement promised undeniable proof of police corruption in our neighborhood. She clicked to her first slide, a photo of our house with glaring red arrows pointing at our front door. From there, she rolled out an elaborate sequence of accusations, timelines, and heavily biased expert assessments. The performance was polished, but the content was pure fiction. That's when Lucas, quietly filming from the back for his documentary, stood and announced he had real footage. The room shifted instantly. Tina fumbled her laser pointer, and I stepped forward with my evidence box. "My wife didn't want to humiliate anyone tonight, but enough's enough," I said, laying out forged fines, fake regulations, and doctored signatures for all to see. Melanie joined me, explaining how the Johnson case involved a meth lab explosion and how she'd carried teenagers to safety before it detonated. Her calm authority contrasted sharply with Tina's unraveling composure. Tina shouted accusations, but Melanie simply reached for her phone. "Shall I call Danny Harris right now?" she asked. The name froze Tina in her tracks, the recognition flickering across her face. Before the tension could snap, the HOA board president stepped in, citing the overwhelming evidence of fraud and announcing Tina's removal. The vote was unanimous. As reality set in, Tina tried to snatch up her props, knocking over chairs in the process, hurling a final warning about the real truth before stumbling toward the exit. Lucas didn't miss a moment of what happened next. His camera caught the once mighty HOA president reduced to a flustered, muttering mess, shoving her evidence into a shopping cart like she was evacuating a disaster zone. She slammed the community center door so hard the exit sign trembled above it. The second she was gone, the whole mood shifted. Neighbors who'd been silent for years began swapping their own stories about Tina's harassment, bogus fines, and intimidation tactics. Kids ran up to Melanie asking for police badge stickers. The HOA board issued a sheepish apology for letting things spiral this far. That night, Lucas uploaded his footage under the title HOA Karen vs. Police Chief A Epic Fail. By morning, it had racked up over 100,000 views. News outlets were calling, the story was going viral, and Tina Foster was rapidly becoming the internet's newest "what happens when entitlement meets its match" cautionary tale. But as Melanie and I sat watching the numbers climb, something unsettled me. Across the street, Tina's house was lit up all night. Behind the curtains, shadows darted and flickered as if she was pacing, packing, or plotting. "What's she doing in there?" I asked. Melanie's gaze stayed fixed on the window. "Planning something desperate," she said quietly. "And desperate people can be dangerous." By the next morning, our street had gone global. 3 million views, international headlines, and morning talk show mentions. Our quiet suburb was suddenly a symbol of poetic justice. Lucas was fielding offers from documentary producers. Even my old editing clients were emailing to say they'd spotted me in the background. While the rest of the world laughed at Tina's downfall, I couldn't shake the feeling she was far from finished. She'd spent 2 years building her identity around her self-appointed role as neighborhood enforcer. Being stripped of that power in front of millions wasn't something she'd simply get over. It was the kind of humiliation that can snap a person. Melanie tried to reassure me, but even she suggested we avoid being alone for a while. Not exactly comforting advice from someone trained to carry a gun. That weekend was the community's annual movie night in the park. Melanie insisted we still go. "We can't let her scare us into hiding," she argued. "With half the neighborhood there," she reasoned, "Tina would have to be truly unhinged to try anything." So we packed our lawn chairs and headed over. Families spread blankets across the grass, kids chased each other with glow sticks, and volunteers prepped the big screen for whatever family film nobody would actually watch. And then, of course, Tina arrived. Oversized sunglasses, baseball cap, slinking to a back corner with her folding chair like she could blend in. Everyone knew exactly who she was. Lucas was in charge of the projector setup, and somehow, whether by mistake or perfect fate, he queued up the wrong file. Instead of the scheduled movie, the massive screen lit up with his viral video. Tina pounding on our door, yelling into a bullhorn, melting down at the HOA meeting. Every glorious moment, complete with his razor-sharp commentary. The second Tina realized what she was looking at, she shot to her feet, shouting, "Turn that off, that's illegal surveillance," and bolted toward the projector. Unfortunately for her, the park had just been watered. Her heels slid out from under her and she went sprawling into the snack table, sending chips, cookies, and bright red fruit punch flying. For a beat, there was silence, then the laughter began rolling, unstoppable. Kids chanted "Karen, Karen," while she tried to stand, covered in punch and crumbs. Nobody rushed to help her. Phones recorded from every angle. Even the elderly neighbors who usually avoided drama were chuckling openly. It was the perfect ending to her reign of public humiliation at the hands of the very people she'd spent years bullying. Finally, she staggered toward her car, dignity left in shreds behind her. She drove off, still smeared with snacks, and something in me knew we'd just witnessed Tina Foster's final act in our neighborhood. But the true turning point came the following evening, when the missing piece of the puzzle finally fell into place. Melanie was in the kitchen making dinner when her phone rang again of the same unknown number that had been popping up for days. This time, she put it on speaker. A man's voice came through, nervous but steady. "Chief Hayes, this is Danny Harris. I changed my name after getting clean. I saw my mom's posts about you online, and I owe you a huge apology." Melanie frowns. "You don't owe me a thing, Danny. How are you doing?" she asked warmly. "I've been clean for 5 years. Got a wife, a little girl, a steady job. All because of you. You saved my life. During the Johnson Kazi you carried me out of that building before it blew up. I've wanted to thank you for a long time." And then another voice cut in, as small, unsure, almost unrecognizable as Tina's. "Danny Harris, you never told me you changed your name. We'd a broken bar. When did you? I've tried to tell you the truth 100 times, Mom," Danny said sadly. "Every time I started, you told me not to defend them and shut me down. You never let me finish." What followed was one of the most heartbreaking conversations I've ever heard. Danny gently explained that Melanie had never hurt him as she'd saved him. The police brutality Tina had raged about for years was actually a rescue from a meth lab that exploded minutes later. His injuries weren't from violence, but from chemical burns that would have killed him if she hadn't acted. "Mom," he said softly, "you've been attacking the woman who gave me a chance to live and to become the man I am now." There was a long, heavy silence. When Tina finally spoke, her voice was broken. "I didn't know. I thought they hurt you. A broken bar. I wanted to protect you." Melanie, with more grace than Tina deserved, replied, "Mrs. Foster, I understand why you were angry, but your son is alive because officers like me run toward danger, not away from it." It wasn't the vengeful kind of justice where someone is crushed. It was the eye-opening kind, where they finally see the truth. Within a week, Tina's house was on the market. The legal costs from her mail fraud charges had drained her savings, forcing her to sell far below market value. She moved to a retirement community in Florida where, true to form, she immediately began lodging complaints about unauthorized landscaping and got herself thrown out of her first home meeting for showing up with a measuring tape. Some people never change, but at least she wasn't our problem anymore. Melanie and I renewed our vows in the community park, surrounded by neighbors wearing Team Chief t-shirts Lucas had designed. Danny Camia, now going by Harrison, bringing his wife and daughter to meet the woman who had saved his life twice, once from an explosion, and once from his mother's obsession. Lucas went on to win a state film competition with his documentary Measuring Madness, which has since racked up more than 15 million views. The top comment still makes me laugh: "She measured everything except her own behavior." And that's how our so-called door-ignoring saga turned into a textbook case of karma. Misused authority will always meet real authority sooner or later. Sometimes karma wears a badge, sometimes it carries a measuring tape, but it always measures up. Here at Ya Stories, we believe justice served cold is the sweetest. And if there's one lesson to take away, it's this: never assume you know who you are dealing with. That quiet neighbor across the street might have far more power than you could ever imagine.